Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are jumping straight into, well, a pretty grim picture painted by a stack of sources we've been going through.
Yeah, grim is one word for it.
We're talking about Hollywood in 2025. And according to, all the industry chatter, the analytical post-mortems, the raw data we've been sifting through, that year went from, I guess, a fragile promise of recovery to an absolute verifiable catastrophe.
It's the definition of a spectacular self-inflicted implosion. I mean, if you think back to the end of the strikes just 2 years ago, the whole mantra was basically survive until 25.
Right. Just get there.
Just get there. The hope was, once the big productions were back on screen, the audience would come flooding back. But our sources suggest they not only failed to survive, but the year started with Hollywood literally on fire.
A metaphorical blaze, obviously.
Of course. Fueled by executive panic and, frankly, creative confusion. And it ended with a fire sale. This whole thing led to this huge existential question being asked out in the open. Is this the end of Hollywood as we know it? Or is it just a massive, incredibly painful correction?
Okay, let's unpack that.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just about a few movies flopping. This is like a systemic diagnosis, and it's rooted in decisions made at the very top.
Exactly.
Our sources point to two major interlocking causes for this whole disaster, two huge strategic errors that just proved fatal in 2025.
Right. And the first one, according to the analysis, was directly tied to how the studios decided to fight the impending AI apocalypse.
The big scary monster in the room.
The big one. So with the strikes raising this specter of automation, instead of innovating, Hollywood just put originality on life support. Market was flooded with another endless churn of, unnecessary remakes, prequels, sequels, reboots.
Live action versions of everything.
Everything. It was the same old product, just recycled, way more expensive, and crucially, often really badly executed. The audience got fatigue, not excitement.
And then there's the second error, which is absolutely key to understanding why the audience just rebelled. And that was the choice to, and this is a direct quote from our sources, continue to piss off half the country.
It's a very charged phrase, but it comes up again and again in the analysis. This deep, almost structural alienation of a huge chunk of the audience through creative and casting choice that, clearly prioritized a message over just telling a good story faithfully.
So you have creative bankruptcy and audience alienation feeding each other. A perfect...
It's fascinating how they interlock. So our mission today is to, be your guides through all this information. We're going to synthesize the stats, the critiques, and count down what the analysts are calling the top 5 Hollywood disasters of 2025.
And we're starting, kind of oddly, with what technically ended up being number 6 on their list.
Yeah, a failure of legacy IP management that was just too big to ignore.
All right, let's jump into the creative. First up, Disney's Doctor Who death.
This one is painful. I mean, it's painful for fans, for analysts, just because of the massive stakes involved in bringing it back. The sources remind us that the show, a huge staple of British TV for decades, was basically on the verge of cancellation.
This was after the Jodie Whittaker run, right?
Right, the disastrous run of the first female doc. The show had just completely lost its way, and the ratings showed it.
So to save it, they bring back the golden boy, Russell T. Davies RT, the guy who spearheaded the big modern revival back in 2005.
Exactly. And he brings back the fan-favorite doctor, David Tennant, for a few special. The idea was to hand the torch over to the new doctor in Gatwa with all this positive momentum.
And they bring in a giant to make it global.
They partner with a behemoth, Disney. They bought the global streaming rights. So the hopes were just astronomically high for this mainstream resurgence of Doctor Who.
But the failure metric, theirs is devastating.
Yeah. The raw data is brutal. Gatwa's first season, right after Tennant, had the worst ratings in the entire history of the show's modern revival.
The worst.
And then his second season in 2025 somehow did even worse. It was just a continuous audience hemorrhage. But the most damning failure, and the real reason Disney backed out, was its performance in the U.S.
What happened there?
It completely failed to chart. Here in America, despite this huge Disney Plus push, it just vanished. The global marketing spend did not translate into viewers at all.
So here's where it gets really interesting, because the sources dig deep into why the audience left. And it's a critique of this fundamental creative shift that was driven by RTD's personal vision.
Yeah, the analysis draws this really sharp contrast between the old show and the new one. The old show, it was the enigmatic doctor, fun, thrilling adventures, morality tales.
Exploring history, sci-fi concepts, that sort of thing.
Exactly. The source describes the new version as having an annoying doctor with an insufferable companion.
Yeah.
In a pretentious, inane, and dumb series of events.
And the analysis summarizes these new stories as being Well, saturated with a specific political ideology. The quote is, they felt like state-sponsored propaganda from the point of view of an elitist champagne socialist gay man.
And we need to be clear, that's a very specific charged language from the source material. It's describing this shift towards what they see as activist narratives that alienated the traditional fan base.
So what were the themes they point to?
The list is pretty specific. Constantly crying cultural appropriation, crying queerness, crying racism, crying anti-capitalism, and just defaulting to evil, straight white men as the main antagonist. The source argues this turned the Doctor from a hero into more of a social lecturer.
And it even extended to the villains.
Oh, yeah. A complete abandonment of the established lore. Instead of bringing back classic monsters, the satyrs, the Autumn, the Cybermen.
The stuff that made the show famous?
Right. They introduced antagonists designed for modern commentary. The source specifically called out the worst villains of them all, a combination AI incel and a straight conservative podcast. It was just a very on-the-nose choice that a lot of viewers rejected.
And that focus on modern commentary, it didn't just stay in the show, it spilled out into how the creators interacted with the audience.
It really did. The fan backlash got so intense that they actually incorporated the criticism into the show's canon.
Wait, what?
Yeah, the source confirms that the fan hashtag RIP Doctor Who, was actually included canonically in the dialogue of the new season.
Wow.
The analysis interprets this as the showrunners not ignoring the criticism, but, actively using it as a plot point. It suggests that fan criticism is taking up spacious real estate in RTD's head, and that makes the whole season feel less like entertainment and more like a giant middle finger to the fans.
And that hostility was just amplified by the actors themselves, right? In their public.
Oh, absolutely. The quotes provided by the source are pretty controversial. Actor Jinx Monsoon, speaking about the changes, said, "Who gives a what bigots thing? For every transphobic, racist, bigoted Doctor Who fan that we lose this season, there are going to be 3 to 5 new fans who are coming in for the representation."
So commercially, they're just openly saying they're sacrificing an existing audience for a speculative.
Pretty much. And then the star, Shadi Gatwa, added to it, telling critics, "Don't watch, turn off the TV, go and touch grass."
So the audience did.
The audience appears to have followed that advice wholesale. The result, as the source summarized it, was a catastrophic collapse. The audience left, Gatwa left the role pretty quickly, and maybe most tellingly, even Disney left the deal.
The conclusion being
that RTD's new Doctor Who was, quote, too woke for Disney. Which is a wild statement, but it reflects the commercial reality. The engagement just wasn't there to justify the partnership.
Okay, moving on to number 5, which deals with maybe the most stable, lucrative IP. This one is titled Blacks, and it failed before a single frame was shot.
The source material really positions Harry Potter as, and this is a quote, the last healthy intellectual property in Western civilization. And when you think about it, it makes sense. It survived the god-awful play.
Oh, that play.
And the failure of the Fantastic Beasts movies, which the analysis says failed because they weren't at Hogwarts. They relied on J.K. Rowling, who's not a screenwriter, and, they removed Johnny Depp.
But despite all that and the controversies around Rowling herself, the core IP is just a monster.
It thrives. 500 million books sold, theme parks are packed, and the best-selling video game out there is Hogwarts Legacy. The appetite is insatiable. So when HBO announced a new series of faithful adaptation, the potential was astronomical.
It could have been the biggest scripted series in the world.
Could have been. The key word is had. The source identifies a single casting decision as the moment that potential just collapsed. A monumental business and creative mistake.
The unforced error.
As the analysis calls it, yes. The casting of Papa Esiadu as Severus Snape, immediately nicknamed Black Snake. This is categorized as one of the worst casting decisions because it broke that core promise of a faithful adaptation.
And this is where the whole fidelity debate really came to a head.
It did. The immediate defense was, he's not explicitly described as white or appearance doesn't matter, but the source just meticulously details the textual evidence to the contrary.
Right, the books themselves.
The books. They cite multiple instances where Snape's paleness is central to his description. His sallow skin had gone the color of sour milk, looking slightly paler than usual, his face being marble white. And on top of that, the analysis points to J.K. Rowling's own sketch of the character, labeled Snape as I Always Saw Him, which is clearly a pale man.
So the promise of a faithful adaptation immediately felt like a lie.
A lie and gaslighting is how the source puts it. And the justification just highlighted that conflict between messaging and story. The idea was diversity, but the source argues it was completely unnecessary.
Because the world is already diverse.
Exactly. The Patil twins, Cho Chang, Kingsley Shacklebolt, who the source says would have been a perfect fit for Papa Isiadu. He becomes Minister of Magic. There were so many ways to do it authentically.
So if it wasn't just about diversity, what are the thematic implications source flag? Why is changing Snape's race such...
It creates huge narrative problems, especially with Snape's past in The Marauders. You have that famous humiliating scene where James Potter and Sirius Black hang Snape up by his trousers. If Snape is black, that scene with Harry's father and godfather suddenly implies
that they're racist bullies.
Right. It fundamentally changes these beloved, if flawed, characters into actual bigots. It's a huge thematic shift.
So the takeaway from the analysis...
It's categorized as a stupid creative and business decision, a virtue-signaling casting based on identity over authenticity. And the crucial irony is that the core audience, the people buying the books and tickets, they would have showed up anyway. This one decision risked alienating the very base they needed, all before a dollar was even recouped.
Okay, let's move on to number 4. A show defined less by what was on screen and more by the drama behind The Witcher Season 4.
Yeah, the source is blunt on this one. It came and went like a fart in the wind. The failure was absolute, and its identity is all about the creative ego and hubris behind the scene.
And it all comes down to, according to the sources, a fundamental disdain for the source material from the showrunner, Lauren Schmidt.
Precise. Her hubris was evident from the start. She said she wanted the world to see Ciri first, which is a huge deviation from the books where everything is filtered through Gerald's perspective. And this wasn't just noticed by fans. Former writer Bo Dio said the writers actively made fun of the books.
Even the author of the books himself chimed.
Yeah, Andrei Sapkowski said publicly that while he gave them ideas, they never listened to me. They just pursued their own thing.
And this is where the Henry Cavill factor becomes so important.
Oh, it's huge. The show was already bleeding audience with him, but it officially died the moment he left. His departure was a direct result of frustration with his writ. Cavill's a massive fan of the books and game, and he campaigned hard to do right by the lore and the fan.
But she resisted.
She resisted. The source quotes Cavill saying this was very much Lauren's own version of the story. So the moment he left, she had complete control. She replaced him with Liam Hemsworth, and she got to make the show she wanted.
And the results were not good.
Catastrophic. The numbers cited in the source are just, wow, 59% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, but a disastrous 20% audience score, a 1.7 audience score on Metacritic, and an average of 4 out of 10 for episodes on IMDb. It's a complete and total audience rejection.
So what about the plot itself? What was the central problem?
The central trope is just completely played out.
Yeah.
Everyone is still looking for Ciri. Vilgartz is looking for her. Yennefer, Gerald, Emperor Emir, a new bounty hunter. Even Ciri is looking for herself because of an identity crisis.
She's the MacGuffin of
the ultimate MacGuffin. The source calls her the girl who is the key to everything, which is a device that's just tired after 8 episodes.
And the focus shifted entirely away from the actual witch.
Completely. The source argues the show should have been called The Yennefer. They took 2 minor chapters from the book and expanded them to make her the primary protagonist, specifically to appeal to female fantasy viewers.
And what were the plot points that got the most criticism?
Well, you had boring Liam as Geralt on a side quest that barely connected to anything. Endless scenes of General Yennefer and her feminist avengers strategizing, constant verbal diarrhea exposition by campfire, and a heavy focus on lesbian Ciri, where they adapted a relationship from the books but removed all the complexity and ambiguity to avoid portraying an abusive relationship, with the showrunner arguing such things never happened.
But wait, didn't the show still get decent streaming numbers at first, just from the name recognition?
That's a key point. It got initial clicks, but the source notes the completion rate was disastrously low. People started, but they did not finish. And there was one moment that actually sparked huge audience joy, but not for the reason they intended.
The Rats incident.
The Rats incident. The show introduces this group called the Rats, described as looking and acting like Twitch stream. They're just annoying. Yeah. And in the only great moment of the series, the bounty hunter Leo Bonhart, played by Chartel Copley, brutally murders them.
And the audience was supposed to feel sad about this.
That was the intention. But the reaction on social media was unmitigated joy. People hated the characters that much.
Wow.
And the result of that reaction is telling. Netflix had a whole spin-off series planned about the Rats. But after seeing the toxic reaction, they thought better of it, scrambled to edit it down into a movie, and just dumped it alongside season 4.
So the ultimate failure was sealed by the studio just losing faith.
Completely. Netflix barely promoted it. The one trailer they released was ratioed into oblivion, just swamped with negative comment. And it never hit the Netflix top 10 for more than a day or two. It's the collapse of a massive fantasy property driven by pure creative ego.
Okay, we're moving into Marvel territory now. And failures 3 and 2 on the list, they share a lot.
Both are about trying to transfer iconic mantles in the MCU.
Number 3 is Captain America 4, Brave New World. And the identity problem is right there in the title. It's a Captain America movie without Steve Rogers.
And the source critiques the choice of Sam Wilson as the new Cap, saying the shield, according to the lore, really should have gone to Bucky. Plus, he's wearing this new suit the source just calls a Power Ranger costume. It lacks the gravitas.
Okay, let's talk about the production hell on this one, because it was a textbook case of operational disaster.
Absolute. Multiple delays that just crippled its chances. It got moved out of 2 prime summer slots into February. The source suggested it was to try and echo the Black Panther success during Black History Month.
Which just lowers its box office ceiling.
Right. Then there was the title change. It was New World Order. But Disney got scared. The term had been co-opted by conspiracy theorists.
Globalist bankers and all?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the real disaster was the budget. Multiple script rewrites, which led to multiple massive reshoots, including reshooting the entire film.
The entire movie.
The whole thing, months after they wrapped. So the budget just ballooned to astronomical proportions.
And then there's the homework, the infamous MCU homework problem.
It was at an absurd extreme here. To follow the plot, you had to have watched The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which the source calls one of the most hateful things Disney's ever made, mostly remembered for Sam Wilson having sympathy for terrorists.
But it gets weirder. You didn't need the other Cap movies, but you did need to see 2008's The Incredible Hulk and 2021's The Eternals.
Which is just bewildering. But it's essential for the central plot device. Remember the giant celestial Tiamat sticking out of the ocean at the end of The Eternals?
The one that was completely ignored in like 8 movies and 9 shows.
That's the one. Suddenly, it matters immensely. Turns out, it's made of adamantium, and there's an international crisis as everyone tries to mine it.
That is spectacularly convoluted. So what was the actual plot this all?
Sam Wilson and the new Falcon, Walking Torah, fight a conspiracy to trigger a war between America and Japan, which the source claims was to avoid offending China. They're joined by a character who is Captain Israel in the comics, but is now just a former Black Widow for some reason.
And the villain?
The leader. From the old Hulk movie. The source says he looks like a piece of broccoli, and his motivation is to secretly replace President Ross's heart pills with Hulk pills, not for power or money, but just to make President Ross look bad.
That's the whole plan.
That's the plan. It drew massive derision.
So how does it end? How does the powerless Sam Wilson beat the superpowered Red Hulk?
With a lecture. He defeats him with a monologue about morality. The source says it makes the sun is going down, big guy, line from Age of Ultron look like Shakespeare.
So the final summary of this whole mess.
It was greenlit as a sequel to a Disney Plus show. It ended up being a bad remake of Winter Soldier, but it functioned as a sequel to a 17-year-old Hulk movie without the Hulk. This disaster was so bad it forced Marvel to announce just 8 months later that they were bringing back the real Captain America.
Which leads us directly to number 2, Ironheart. And the source points out a lot of common denominators here with Cap 4.
The similarities are striking. Both are adaptations from the all-new, all-different era of comics, a period of creative decline. Both involved mantles passed down based on identity, had creative teams chosen based on identity, and suffered the exact same production hell.
Ballooning budgets, delays.
Yep. Ironheart sat on the shelf for a full 2 years after they finished it.
2 years? That's a huge waste of capital.
It is. And the studio had no confidence. It was one of Marvel's lightest promoted shows, just dumped in 2 parts over 1 week on Disney+. Even a last-minute video from Robert Downey Jr. couldn't save it.
And the core creative mistake, according to the analysis, was that they actually properly adapted the comic book origin story.
Exactly. The analysis argues that Riri Williams' origin is fundamentally that of a villain, not a hero. And because the show was so faithful to the source, that contradiction was just unavoidable.
Okay, so let's trace this villain origin stuff. Where did we first meet Riri in the MCU?
She debuted in Wakanda Forever, where the source notes she helped an isolationist ethno-state fight off an immigrant invasion. Then she gets to MIT, but is kicked out for selling tests to fund her work. So right away, she's cutting ethical corners.
And her work involved building a suit that was better than Tony Stark, which she stole the IP for.
That's right. She creates this incredible suit, then steals proprietary Wakandan AI to power it, accidentally creating an AI copy of her dead best friend to be her OS. She's a genius, but also a habitual intellectual property.
So instead of using her genius to make billions, she goes into crime.
The source notes she chooses to work with a criminal organization led by the Hood, who was race swapped, and a group the analysis calls the Trans Tight, to make what the source mocks as thousands of dollars.
And this path had real human consequences.
A trail of bodies, innocent working-class security guards, a tech billionaire. The source summarizes her actions as theft, destruction, and homicide. The story ends with betrayal and Riri literally selling her soul to the devil. It's classic villain stuff, but she's presented as the hero.
And what was the stated intent of the showrunner?
The stated intent was to depict the lived-in experience of marginalized people set in the South Side of Chicago. But in the show, this translated to focusing on diverse people committing crimes like breaking and entering, theft, and homicide. The Force critiques this as just confusing criminality with heroism.
So the outcome?
In a year where almost everything from Marvel bombed, Ironheart was deemed the worst, an undeniable, iconic failure, largely because the stated social message just clashed completely with the deeply problematic story they adapted from the comic.
We've covered 4 massive failures, but before we get to number 1, we have a section of dishonorable mentions that really show the breadth crisis.
Yeah, a quick analysis of these confirms the pattern. Let's start with the second season of The Last of Us on HBO.
So they decided to adapt the story from the second game, which the core fan base absolutely...
A hugely divisive game. And the show, according to the source, just succeeded in finding whole new audience to hate it. It's summarized by one endlessly mocked line of dialogue. I'm gonna be a dad. Just clunky emotional manipulation.
Then there's the epitome of late-stage Hollywood, the Kim Kardashian lawyer show.
Debuted with 0% on Rotten. It's now at 6%, but it still got renewed for a second. The source says this just shows that if something serves a corporate or celebrity function, the financial and creative failure just doesn't matter.
Next up, a cinematic audit, War of the World.
Yeah, filmed during the Co-era for Amazon Prime, but released 5 years later. It has Patriot Ice Cube as a Homeland Security officer defeating aliens with the help of Amazon delivery drivers and Amazon gift cards.
You're kidding!
I'm not. The source also notes the super low-budget production, like no furniture in the green screen offices, just a total mess.
Back to Marvel for a second with Fantastic Four.
A failure defined by 2 casting choices. First, Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards, the smartest man in the MCU, who the source says just lacked the intellectual gravitas. Second, the justing dumb decision to use a female Silver Surfer instead of the classic.
But wait, this one made money, right? The source calls it a flop, but it was their highest-grossing film of the year.
That's the paradox. It's their highest-grossing flop. It means that while it made, say, $700 million, the astronomical production and marketing costs meant the studio still lost money overall.
It didn't meet the profitability threshold.
Exactly. And finally, Stranger Things Season 5.
The long-awaited finale. And the focus was all on Will's coming out.
Predictable. But the execution was the problem. The scene was reportedly a 12-hour shoot, placed late in the penultimate episode, and resulted in what the analysis calls a weirdly staged monstrosity of pandering. It drew comparisons to Game of Thrones Season 8.
Never a good sign.
No. Okay. All of those are perfect appetizers for the main course. It is time for the undeniable #1 Hollywood disaster of 2024.
The crowning jewel, the live-action remake of Snow.
This one, the source notes, was the most predictable disaster of the year, maybe the decade. An ill-conceived concept from start to finish.
The initial problem was casting Gal Gadot and Rachel Zegler, but the disaster was really catalyzed by Zegler's subsequent 2-year-long, most well-documented PR disaster in cinema.
She just kept talking, and her comments were just incendiary to the core Disney audience.
The analysis highlights her critique of the original, calling the 1937 film's love story weird and saying the prince was a guy who literally stalks her. She also publicly suggested all the prince's scenes could get cut.
She also complained about being paid to wear the dress, claimed she stood for 18 hours and deserved more money. And then she mixed in politics, telling listeners their reproductive rights are on the line, urging them to go vote blue, and telling people who disagreed to unfollow her.
And this created a crisis internally.
The source is very clear on that. The situation got so bad, a Disney executive had to fly to her house to personally tell her to shut the fuck up. But the PR disaster just kept going for 2 years.
And it wasn't just her. There was also the dwarf controversy.
Right. This started with Peter Dinklage's comments about the backward story of 7 little people living in a cave. His criticism led to the dwarves being completely recast as, according to the source, 7 nightmarish demons.
Demons.
A diverse group of varying height and ethnicity, none of whom were little people, and who looked visually terrifying. This, of course, led to now on-brand massive Disney reshoot and a ballooning budget.
So let's break down how completely they subverted the original Walt class.
The original is an innocent stepdaughter seeking a good man, revived by true love's kiss, classic fairy tale.
And the remake.
The remake features a not-so-innocent stepdaughter who just wants to become a girl boss. She takes refuge with the 7 nightmarish demon who she immediately bosses around. And she's revived not by a prince, but by a failed actor whose kiss doesn't even work. She has to basically self-resuscitate through empowerment.
And all the classic charming elements were gone.
Gone. The charm, the look of the dwarves, the animated animals, the classic songs, replaced, according to the analysis, by a song about female empowerment and communist propaganda, referring to the film's anti-capitalist themes.
The source concludes it was a historic flop that cost Disney hundreds of millions.
And it turned Rachel Zegler into the poster child for everything that's wrong with modern Hollywood. The remake became a metaphor for cultural decline, while the original represented everything good about Disney's golden age.
Okay, so let's step back. Looking at all 6 Doctor Who, Black Snake, Witcher, the 2 Marvel films, Snow White, what are the macro trends?
3 huge structural issues stand out. First, creative bank, just total reliance on recycled IP. Second, runaway production costs, all driven by rewrites and reshoot. And third, the consequences of the strikes from 2 years prior, which just exacerbated all the chaos.
But underneath all of that, the consistent fatal failure was their relationship with the audience. The core conflict was this shift away from authenticity.
It's the failure to maintain fidelity to the lore in favor of identity-driven or message-driven content. And it resulted in the active alienation of the core fans, the people who actually cared about.
Whether it was changing Cap or Snape or Snow White.
The audience felt systematically they were told what to feel, instead of being given a story that made them feel it now.
Which raises the big question for the future. How does Hollywood fix this in 2026? They're facing potential new strikes and an urgent need to stop pissing off half the country.
And this is where the AI revolution comes back. Our sources framed these disasters as Hollywood trying to fight AI by sacrificing originality. They're trying to justify expensive human-made content by recycling nostalgia. But if you recycle the nostalgia while alienating the people who are nostalgic for it, you create a commercial vacuum.
That's the ultimate quandary. If cheap AI-generated content is coming to flood the market, what is the value of expensive human-made content that betrays the very reason the audience loved it in the first place?
It leaves the consumer with no good reason to pay for the premium product.
And it forces Hollywood to confront a hard...
That fidelity to the source and respect for the audience, it may not just be a creative choice. It might be the only surviving business model left.
And that is the final provocative thought. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the wreckage of 2025. Now go forth.